When was the last time you and your fiance said an actual dollar, pound, rupee figure out loud to your family? Not a bracket of between this and this or a hint, not a we'll see how it goes. An actual figure of what you're budgeting to spend on your wedding. Here's why that conversation matters more than you might think. The most surprising thing in this year's wedding data, God love it, isn't who pays, it's what happened once someone does. Because get this, this is what the data, all the surveys and stuff that have come out this year, this is what the data shows. The more financial help a soon-to-be wed couple accepts, the bigger their wedding tends to get. Not cheaper, bigger, more expensive. Which means every time a parent or a family member offers to put something on a credit card or makes a contribution towards something or says, well, don't worry about that one, you're not just being handed money. You're being handed and accepting a wedding that's about to grow with all the extra obligations, conversations, and differing opinions that come along with it. So before you write that next email to your florist or have a chat about the guest numbers or whether someone's plus one is really, really worth it or necessary, it's worth knowing what this current data actually says about where that money comes from in 2026 in Australia, in the US, and in plenty of other places. Today, you're going to learn how money really works in a 2026 wedding budget, what cultures around the world do with money and weddings, which is so far departed from what you think is normal, and exactly what to say when you have that conversation with your family. Let's get stuck into it.
Unbridely is a community of pro-wedding vendors who believe in freedom and integrity in weddings, giving you options, solutions, tips and tricks to create the experience and memories that you and your fiancé really want and deserve. Because we believe that weddings are a team sport. With how-tos, stories and interviews with recently married couples, we find out what went right and what they'd change if they could go back and do it all over again. I'm Camille and welcome to the Unbridely podcast.
Let's start with where this idea even came from, because most of us inherited this belief about who should pay for a wedding, and so we believe that it's right. And we also never asked where it came from or why. For most of documented history, marriage wasn't really about love. It was about wealth, it was about property, it's about family alliances. When a daughter married, her family would often pay for the event because the wedding itself marked the moment that financial responsibility for the daughter shifted from one family, her family, to another, the groom's family. The bigger and more elaborate the wedding celebration, the more it conveyed that the bride's family's wealth and social standing was good. It was high. They were someone to be looked up to. And this is the version of planning and paying for a wedding that many of us in Western society grew up with. And fair enough, we've assumed it's tradition, in inverted commas. I think it's also worth saying that while it was common, it was never a rule. It was a wedding custom that suited the time, of course, a particular set of ideas about women, money, and different family roles that most of us, thankfully, don't hold on to anymore. So if you've ever felt a strange pressure around who's supposed to pay, that pressure is inherited from an idea that's now hundreds of years old and wasn't really about romance or love or free choice or anything like that. So I'm guessing there's a fair chance that it doesn't suit your current situation and circumstances either. And here's where it gets more interesting, because that whole bride's family pays idea isn't universal. I mean, outside of Australia, the UK and the US, it's just one version of the custom amongst many, many others. So just, touching tip of the iceberg here, in traditional Chinese custom, it's flipped entirely. So the groom's family is expected to cover most of the major costs, the rings, the ceremony, the banquet, and is also to send gifts, betrothal gifts, to the bride's family before the wedding even happens. In Mexico, the structure of who pays and when and why looks completely different again. Instead of one or two families splitting the bill, the cost is spread across a whole neighborhood of padrinos or godparents and madrinas or godmothers, sponsors who needn't be blood relatives at all. So one person might pay for the cake, another the music, another the flowers. It's a community funding model rather than just the two families of the couple getting married. And then here's another one. So in many Nigerian cultures, it runs in the opposite direction to the Western default. The groom's family pays a bride price. Doesn't that make you feel a bit? To the bride's family, negotiated between elders from both sides before any gifts are presented. And then in Jewish tradition, you'll often see both families contributing. Sometimes those contributions, the funding is split by role, with the bride's side hosting the reception and the groom's side covering the ceremony and the ring. And even that, in practice today, varies enormously from family to family. And then to top it all off, in France and Italy, there's often no gendered expectation at all, and costs just get split pretty evenly between families, full stop. There you go. And of course, none of these are set in stone. None of them are a given, and they're just generalizations. So if you walked into your engagement assuming, and it's fair enough, because you did, didn't you? I always did. I did. But if you assume there is one normal way that all of this works, it's exceedingly rare. The chances are very, very slim that your assumption is going to be exactly the same as your fiance's family or your friend's family, or honestly, even your own extended family. There isn't a universal default. And this is despite what I saw, I think it was last night in a Facebook wedding group. It was a post from a bride-to-be who stated, quite clearly, without irony, that it's tradition that the groom's family pay for the drinks at the reception. It's very clear to me, at least in this day and age, the traditions and expectations of weddings and how they should be celebrated have been well and truly combined, refined, and changed for all time. And if you want to think that your family's way is the right or only way, mate, it's really setting you up for conflict and massive disappointment. There's only what your specific families assume, which is exactly why this conversation needs to be said out loud, talked about openly, freely, and honestly. So let's have a look into that data that I was talking about, where most of the Unbridled podcast listeners live, Australia and the US, because the numbers this year tell a far more specific story than just parents pay or couples pay. I'll start with Australia. So the 2026 Easy Weddings Australian Wedding Industry Report puts the average Australian wedding at $38,252. And 69% of couples report receiving some financial help from family or friends. But what's interesting is, even among couples who do get help, the family funding is an average of 39% of the total cost, which means that even with some family help here in Australia, the couple, on average, is still paying for the majority of their wedding themselves. Now, in the United States, Zola's 2026 First Look report surveyed more than 11,500 couples, and they found that 71% receive some level of financial help, which is almost identical to Australia. So that's crazy. But the how of that help is very different. The old tradition of one family footing the entire bill is pretty much out the door. But among couples who do get help, 69% say both families are contributing, not just one side. And there's a generational split here as well. Millennials are spending more overall, with 37% spending over $40,000 and 33% fully self-funding their wedding. You know, this just might be an age thing, like where they are in their lives. Gen Z couples are far more budget conscious, with 43% under $20,000, but they're actually more likely than millennials to have the wedding fully covered by family. And here's the kicker, and it's the thing I really want you to take away from this episode. Of the couples who cover 70% or more of the cost of their wedding themselves, you know, they're footing the majority of the bill, they spend 23% less than other couples on average, 23% less. And weddings that are heavily family funded cost nearly double. I'm going to say that again. If a couple covers 70% or more of their own wedding bill, they spend nearly a quarter less than the average couple. But if they have their family or families fund most of their wedding costs, that dollar amount almost doubles. More money from families doesn't make a wedding more affordable. It tends to, and the data says so, make it bigger. It's more expensive for everyone. Do you know what one of the biggest regrets of newly married couples is? They'll say, I wish I had more memories from my wedding day. It was my favourite day. And one of the smartest ways I've seen couples do this is by making sure that they arrange a quick, foolproof and really simple way to collect and share their guests' wedding photos. Because if you think about it, with an average wedding of, say, 100 guests, with every one of them taking 5 photos or videos, I mean, they'll take much more, of course, but I'm talking about the good ones. That's an opportunity for you to collect and download 500 extra photos and videos of their perspective on your wedding day. The stuff that happened that you didn't even get to see. But your barriers are overly complicated instructions or processes. Let's face it, if it takes too long, forces your guest into registering, if you've got to use a certain social media platform, or it's just a pain in the ass, and I'm looking at you, Dropbox and Google Drive, your family and friends just won't do it. And the tech fear and privacy concerns too, because no one wants to download yet another app that has a data breach. Never Miss Moments is an essential resource for busy soon-to-be-weds just like you. Your unlimited photo and video gallery is held in a secure server for 12 months, and for your guests, it's a one-click QR code solution. There's no app to download, no need to register, and it's quick. Win-win. Your guests will be able to look back on and reminisce about your wedding, and your fam and friends' different perspectives of your wedding day is such an incredible lifelong gift for you too. The team at Never Miss Moments are obsessed with giving you the very best customer service, and I'm stoked to be able to pass on their special 10% off discount offer on their galleries when you go to nevermissmoments.com/unbridely. So that's never miss moments, all one word, .com/unbridely, which, in case you don't already know, UNBRIDELY. The discount will show up in your cart automatically. And of course, I'll pop the link in the show notes for you as well. Which brings us to the part that nobody wants to say out loud because it's uncomfortable as fuck, no matter what side of the equation that you're on. If your family offers to help, most of the time, it's framed as a gift for your marriage. And frequently it's given with love and good wishes, and so it feels like every other present you've ever received in your life to date that comes with no strings attached. Unfortunately, in and around weddings, money is rarely given or gifted without some expectation riding along with it, even when nobody says so. A contribution towards catering can very easily become strong opinions about the guest list or the menu. and a gift of cash to put towards your venue cost can turn into a debate about the seating chart. On the flip side, if your families are not contributing at all to your wedding, there's a different discomfort, isn't there? And you might feel like your own wedding is shrinking to fit the budget you can afford, while a friend's family covers the cost of theirs completely, which logically it doesn't make your wedding any less, but it still stings. And of course, it doesn't mean that your families love you any less than your friend's family loves them, does it? No, of course not. But these weird, strange feelings bubble to the surface. And neither side of that story is a problem. It's just, this is what happens when money and relationships get mixed together at exactly the same moment you're trying to start and build a life with someone and their family. I don't think it's possible to ignore this or pretend that tension isn't there, but rather the solution is to bring it up early enough in the planning that people don't end up resentful on the big day. So the conversation. So when I'm talking about having a conversation about money with your families, what does this actually look like in real life? First of all, if it's at all possible, have the money conversation before you book anything or anyone in and not after. If one or both of your families are offering support, see if you can get specific, details from them from the start. Because when someone says, we'd love to help, it's intended as a generous and loving gesture, but also is completely useless when you're trying to build a budget. You really need a figure, and even if it's a rough one, before venues and vendors start asking for booking fees. Now, what if a family member wants to contribute, because my mum did and my dad contributed different things as well? What if they want to help you out by paying the costs for a particular vendor or a particular thing? Let's say photographer, for example, but you don't know, and your parents definitely don't know what they cost or, what the price range is, because I'll pay for the photographer sounds super simple until you realize that neither of you have priced what that actually means in dollar figures. So here's a couple of things I'd recommend. Get real numbers before agreeing on the dollars, not after. So photographer pricing, my God, there's a huge range, and I'll cover the photographer can mean wildly different things, of course, fair enough, depending on who you book. So in a market like Adelaide, for example, you could probably, don't know if I'd recommend it, but you can find someone, a photographer, starting at around $1,500. But if you're looking for quality work with some real experience behind them and some consistency and stability, good business practices and customer experience, you're looking closer to a starting price of $4,000 or $5,000. Without a number attached, you and the family member who is very kindly offering to help could be picturing completely different photographers. So turn that offer, that very vague offer, into a defined commitment by getting some quotes. So once you've got 2 or 3 real quotes for photographers who are actually available, by the way, that you genuinely be happy with, you can go back to your family member with something like, we're looking at $6,000 to $7,000 for someone we love. Would you be comfortable covering up to, $3,000 or $4,000 or whatever you think is reasonable depending on their situation? That converts the kind and vague gesture into something you can both actually plan around, rather than just this open-ended promise that, frankly, it might not match up with any of your expectations once that real invoice shows up. And that's when the conversation and relationships sour. Also, decide that gap up front, that plan about what if the amount that your family member wants to gift you is less than the amount of the photographer, for example, that you're booking, that you really want. Decide beforehand whether you're going to top up the difference yourselves or you're going to adjust who you book before any booking fee is paid and not after. An open offer to help like this is exactly how the budget as a whole grows, like I said before, when you get help, without you even realizing it. Because once someone says, I'll cover the photographer, it's super tempting to have a look at photographers, in a different price range that you wouldn't have considered if you were paying for it all on your own. And once you've got the real numbers from everyone who wants to contribute, who wants to gift you, put them somewhere that everyone can and will access. So it might be a shared budget tracker. It might be a simple Google sheet. That one document becomes the thing you check before saying yes to anything, instead of guessing line by line whether you can afford the florist upgrade. The next thing you need to do is to separate what is a true gift and what is an expectation in disguise as early as you possibly can. If a contribution towards your wedding comes with an unspoken, and therefore we get a say, it's worth naming that gently and directly, rather than discovering it 3 months in when you're disagreeing about the cake. Something as simple as, we're so grateful for this, and we want to make sure expectations are clear on both sides, can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. The third thing you need to do, if you're not accepting help towards your wedding costs, that's your choice too. And you don't owe anyone an explanation beyond just something dismissive. We've got this covered, but thanks for offering. You can say it warmly, but you don't need to justify it, quite frankly. And number 4, if you've noticed another couple's family funding their whole wedding and your family is barely registered that you're even engaged, let yourself feel that disappointment without turning it into a damning verdict on your own family. Different families, they have different histories, they have different capacities. And it's true, it's not a competition, even though it can feel like one at midnight when you're doom scrolling through someone else's social feed, right? Ease up on yourself, ease up on your family. It's okay to feel a bit disappointed about maybe the expectations that you grew up with, your vision for how it might be and how it actually is. Now, I've stood at the front of more than 1,080 ceremonies now. And if there's one thing I can tell you about money and weddings, it's this. None of your guests will remember 6 weeks later, 6 months later, 6 years later, who paid for what. What they do remember is how it felt to be in that room with you. And the couples I've seen handle this the best are the ones who had the awkward money conversations early, sometimes months before they'd even started talking to vendors, sometimes before they'd even gotten engaged too. And then they just let it go. They're not always the couples with the biggest budgets or the most modest ones. They were the couples who knew exactly where the money was coming from, what it meant and what it didn't mean, and who then chose to spend the rest of their engagement enjoying their time together and not stressing about that. They literally parked it to one side. So have the real conversation with the real dollar or pound numbers sooner rather than later, not because the money matters that much in the end, but because that conversation is what will protect the relationship the money is meant to be celebrating. And until next time, celebrate your people.
That about wraps it up for this episode of the Unbridely podcast. For the links and resources we mentioned, please head to the show notes. And if you love the show, please review and subscribe on the podcast platform you're on now so you don't miss out on a single episode. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, weddings are a team sport. Catch you soon.